Já vás vítám na dalším srazu reactivistů, ale my jsme se trošku přejmenovali. A proč se jmenujeme Reactive Meetup Brno? Proč se tak jmenujeme, vám vysvětlíme. Stojí tady se mnou Miky a Honza. Já přidám slovo Honzovi z kiwi.com, díky kterému vlastně tohle všechno vzniklo.
Tak ahoj, já se jmenuji Honza Leha, pracuji jako komunitní manažer pro kiwi.com. Za kiwi.com my jsme moc rádi, že tady můžeme uvítat další technologický meetup, protože ty komunity informatiků, kteří se scházejí po Brně, jsou pro nás důležitý a chceme nějakým způsobem se podílet na rozvoji lidí, kteří se zabývají zajímavými věcmi. Já přidám slovo Míše. Míša je organizátorka největší konference kolem Reactu ve střední Evropě, Reactive na Slovensku, v Bratislavě. A to vám řekne něco víc o tom dnešním samotném meetupu.
Společně tu sešli všichni tři jeden důvod, že my nechceme, aby ta komunita byla roztříštěná, ale my chceme, aby se nás tu potkávalo víc a víc, abyste se navzájem znali a chceme vám vozit fakt jakože zajímaví lidi a na to potřebujeme, nebo zajímaví speakery, začínáme tady s Andrejem. Tak, potlesk.
I don't understand it, but yeah, it's cool.
To znamená, budoucí rok se tu budeme potkávat takto, s tímto brandem, budeme vás pomalu učit, abyste se nám registrovali přes těch titulů a všechny ty náležitosti, to všechno bude. A to by stačilo, ne? Každopádně, jak říkal tady ještě Honza, pořádáme konferenci, na kterou jste všichni zvaní, budeme s váma od příště ještě soutěžit o volné tikety na tu konferu. To znamená, určitě potřeba hlásit se na to tyto a prostě tak. Za mě všechno, užijte si to.
Who don't understand Czech? Okay. For you, we will repeat it later. První dva body máme za sebou. A teď nezbývá nic jiného, než pozvat na pódium Andreje. So please welcome Andrey.
Hey guys.
This talk about Modular CSS. And before he start, I would like to thank you kiwi.com. Přepnu do češtiny, protože je nás tady víc. Kromě toho, že nás dali dokupy, tak díky nim se scházíme tady v tomhle skvělém prostoru. Jo? Myslím si, že víc z vás, co jste přišli, tak jste se rozhodli velice dobře, protože venku je teplo, tady je chládek, žádný fotbal dneska není a myslím si, že tohle je ideální způsob, jak strávit dnešní večer. Takže prostor a občerstvení, za to děkujeme kiwi.com a už předávám slovo Andrejovi.
Thank you. Let's begin. Hi, thank you for coming out, and thanks for inviting me to Brno. It's my first time in Brno. I live in Vienna. I originally from Russia. That's me looking at some legacy CSS. And here are some Twitter handle, my homepage and stuff. And I design and build user interfaces for living. And today we will be talking about user interface. And many of us, I hope so, front-end developers know like lots of UI libraries and frameworks we can't live without. Of course, my choice of UI library is React, but there are many out there, also Bootstrap and all this stuff. And all of them are talking about UI components. So that's the thing we live now, and that's the thing we build when we think about user interface, we think about UI components. And that's how I imagine a UI component, right? So one huge UI component can contain different smallish one, and each one of them has a separate state. And when we go to one component, it contains of some data, some user input, some encapsulated logic, and also some appearance. Yeah, that guy. And good components are self-contained. And that's true for most of parts, but still, we do something horrible like this. So basically, we encapsulate all the data, all the user input and logic into a component, but then we just write CSS and share it in somewhere in global file, which brings us to like this mandatory image of CSS. So everybody who works with CSS probably feel like this. Yes. But it shouldn't be like that, right? So we can try fixing it because we went a long way from like writing CSS to building UI components, right? And my first thing, what I would like to talk about today is how we can improve our project structure. And these are some points I would like to point. And the first question, let's take React, for example, because it's all about React these days, and I love it. And React makes it really simple to write components. And this is a very simple example written in React. It's some kind of button. It has class name button, and then we have a span element called label, with class name label, some click me in it, and basically that's it. And then, as a developer, when you look at it, let's say you didn't write that code, you just came into the project and you took a look at it and think, but where is this class defined actually? And when you go through this, okay, let's just find it. Yeah, it's actually an actual screenshot. I scrolled it down and up just to show how bad can it be on a legacy project. It's a real project. I worked in it. It's 75K application.css. No jokes here. And it's 2 years old project. It's not like something like 10 years old you would expect here. So would be cool if we could just say like, let's import our CSS right in the component, so we can say like this button and label should be defined in this CSS, right? And the second thing is many of us heard from Rails and all this stuff about separation of concerns. And this is how the usual folder structure looks like for many of us front-end developers, right? If you look into any Rails project, it will be something like /public, /images, /tons of images. This is just a short example because my screen real estate is really limited here, but usually it's just like hundreds of images, and you can't say what image is going where and what CSS file is going where, right? And this is a tidy one, but usually it looks like a mess. And to me, it's not a separation of concerns, it's separation of technologies. Why, as a UI developer, I should care about if it's style sheet or JavaScript file, I actually should be caring about my components, right? So like, would be great to just have my components and a button here and all these files that like belong to this button, right? And this would allow me to just import this button CSS right in this file relative to this file. And that would be answer to a question, where is this button class name coming from? I would expect it coming from button.css, right? But the thing is, that browser was still expecting us to provide link and script tags. And most of build tools we know about are still working in file trees. So we came from Grunt to Gulp, which is an improvement, of course, but we still operate on files. But we want to operate on something like more complex, like dependency graph, like in a major language, right? And luckily for us, there's this guy. It's called Webpack. How many of you heard about Webpack? Because it's, wow, that's awesome. Because not everybody in React community using Webpack, but many of us, it's kind of a standard de facto. So I'm really glad you use it or heard of it. So I don't have to stop here, but basically what it does is it takes dependency graph and outputs some static assets, be it JavaScript files or CSS files or even your images, which is cool because this is what we want to do, and this is how simple it is, right? It's just like a few lines of code in your webpack config, because there's a notion that webpack is hard, webpack is complex. And if you compare it to a regular gulp file or grunt file, you will be amazed how short this thing is and how much it allows you to do, because this will even embed your images into your CSS file, right? Inline it as a base 64, depending on a file size. And this also allows this, which is cool. And yeah, once again, probably. And we just fixed like tons of stuff here. Yeah, we now have explicit dependencies. We collocate our JavaScript, CSS, and images file, and we have nice folder structure, so everybody, or like especially newcomers, can just jump in the project and say like, oh, this is a button component, and if I want to refactor it, I just move it somewhere, or I just delete it. There's no files left that should be cleaned up or, I don't know, removed. And there's another sort of issues here in UI/frontend development world we have to deal with, and this is the CSS, and we still have this global namespace, cascade, it's CSS, it stays for cascade style sheets, and we don't have any isolation, and we still have this magnification issues. And this is how most of us probably feel when we try to debug this element. Yeah, you just open a developer tools in Chrome, and you're just going through this inheritance stuff, and it's not fun. And when this guy, Mark Talgish, wrote this article, it's called The End of Global CSS. If you didn't read it, please do, because this is the vision that changed everything, basically. He just proposed, what if we could, instead of like modifying a global environment, global state, what if we could write local CSS like we do in JavaScript files nowadays? And just a few days ago, CSS-modules came out. It's based on webpack. This is why I'm talking about webpack before, because this implementation works on using webpack. And I would actually want to know how many of you heard about CSS modules here. Oh, cool, quite a few, probably half. Which is also cool because I think this changed a lot to our job, to our profession. And what's actually CSS modules? Yeah? How does it work? And let's take the same example as before. So we have this import of button CSS, which is basically a side effect in this case. So when we execute this code, webpack will inject this style sheet into the DOM for the config I showed before, right? So we will be injecting something. So, and this is pretty simple button.css. We have just the rules here, just to make it clear. Nothing fancy is going on. And this is the only change we do to our webpack config. So for CSS loader, we just add these modules and some other parameter. I'm not a fan of this query parameters. It will change. It will be changed in second version of webpack, in major version, which is much more.
How it will be changed?
It will be a query. It will be a separate object. So it will not be a query object. It will be just normal JavaScript object, which is much more clear for stuff like this. But it's much more shorter to show on the slide here. Yeah, but this is mess, yeah. And it's been changed, basically. Webpack 2 is in beta, and you can use it right now. And now from import button.css, we can go to import styles from button.css. And this is also the place we have to change. So right now, we don't just import something, we import an object, which looks like this when we execute it. So this styles is just a JavaScript object, a plain object, these keys being our class names and values being some generated strings, which is, in this case, is file name, a class name, and some base 64 hash that is unique for this class name and file name. This guarantees that these class names will be unique for the whole application. And in the end result, when we render this React component, it goes from this to this. So we basically just get them for free. So we don't have to type longish class names that BAM requires you to do. You write your short class names for your component, and you get it. Very cool use case for CSS modules is code modification, because with BAM, everybody knows what BAM is, right? I assume. Cool. Okay, raise your hand. Okay, quite a few. Okay, BAM is. I think it will be okay to say it's a naming convention, and in this case, what matters is that is naming convention that allows you to solve basically same problems with namespaces and all this stuff by writing your class names in a special order, in a special rules. And usually, if you use BAM in production, you end up with pretty much long class names for in HTML. So that was also always an issue for people who don't like BAM. They always like saying, yes, but your HTML is huge because each element has like, I don't know, 20 class names in it. Or it's pretty much long, right? So with this config, we can go from this to this without even rewriting our code, right? So we just did quite a lot here. Also a cool thing, we can catch undefined class names. So when you use CSS modules and in React component, you use some class name that is not defined in your CSS file, it will be rendered as undefined because it will be undefined key in an object. And just by adding this CSS snippet in some global CSS, you will get some huge alert across the screen that will be saying that this class name definition is missing in your CSS module, so please add it or remove this usage, right? And I think the next step would be to automate this, and that will allow us to remove that code from CSS. And I think there's some work being done in this regard, but I'm not quite sure what state it is right now, so you have to check yourself. But I think we are not far away from that code elimination as well, which is also quite cool, because we just solved all these issues with just some simple change in a config file. But CSS modules can allow you much more than just that. So basically, it's they create local class names by default. But if you prefer some, or you have to use some global class name in a legacy project, or I don't know why, you can always override it. You can use a composition. So if you have your common rule set and a .common class name, and you can write like .normal compose common, it will inherit all this stuff without increasing the size of your CSS, so it will add 2 class names automatically for you into this object. And then you can add some disabled class names the same way, so you don't repeat yourself. You also get some dependencies, which is cool because you can now export some code that you would like to reuse in different files to some shared file and export from it explicitly. You still can use preprocessors with it, so nothing says that you can't use SAS or less with CSS modules, and this makes your code even more tidy. It also works with server on the server side, and pretty much with any framework or client side or server side. So it's not just client side library. And this is the thing behind it. It's called PostCSS. This is the website I helped design. And what is PostCSS? To me, it's like Bubble, but for CSS, right? So PostCSS takes your CSS as string, it parses it, it builds a abstract syntax tree, then applies some plugin, and then stringifier returns you new CSS from it. So what can be done? I think everybody uses autoprefix nowadays. So if you use autoprefix, you use PostCSS. There's no other way of using autoprefix. So autoprefix automatically adds vendor prefixes to your CSS. But to determine if you need a vendor prefix, it uses can I use database? So you can define what browser you want to support, and it will add just the required prefixes. And you don't have to write, you don't have to care about it, so it happens automatically. You still can use SAS or less syntax with PostCSS without using SAS or less, which is much more faster. You can do stuff like fallbacks for older browsers. CSS-modules is another example. You can write tomorrow's CSS today. This is not a standard thing, it will change, but you can compile, so this is basically why I think it's like Bubble, because you write something but doesn't standardize yet, but you get a standard CSS back. And you can do crazy things, like you can write linters about it, so you can now say this isn't a valid CSS, which isn't possible with just preprocessors, right? And this is how easy it is to integrate with your webpack config. You just add a PostCSS loader, and this is a simple example of configuration for your PostCSS. So it uses pre-CSS, which is a SAS syntax, basically preprocessor. It uses this plugin PostCSS calc, and autoprefix is set up for last 2 versions of current browsers. And this is an example of how to use stylelint as a pre-commit hook. This is a package I wrote that simplifies the setup for linting of your staged files. So when each time you ready to commit it to Git and you have some file staged, this will run stylelint on all CSS files and these staged files, which is much faster than if you would run on all files. So yeah, to sum up, PostCSS is much more powerful than preprocessor because of abstract syntax tree it uses. It's also much faster. Huge amount of plugins, so you can go crazy. There are plugins like you can write CSS in German if you would like. It looks funny. You have to check it out. I don't have any screenshot here, but it's really crazy. There are features like linting or automatic property sorting. So each time you want to enforce some style guide in your team, you can use PostCSS to automate it. And these are questions if you should use it or not. So to me, it's like if you work in a team, you definitely should use it because it helps to keep your code base sane. If you plan to update your CSS in the future, your future you will thank you for using this stuff. If you use some third-party CSS like Bootstrap or any other library and you hate conflicts, also CSS-modules is an answer because you don't care about how your class name look in your component. It will not conflict with any of Bootstrap more than 6,000 selectors that are in global scope. Yeah, you care about code readability and readability, and you hate manual work. So these are use cases to use for PostCSS and CSS modules in particular. And I think that's it for today. It's me happy about CSS modules and sane CSS. Thank you. And I think we have a lot of time for Q&A. So if you have any question, please ask me.
I can help. Go.
Raz, dva, raz, has. OK.
Thanks. What's about that, urban legend that CSS modules are really slow? Even if you have SSD and powerful CPU, the compile of the webpack is really slow. How this thing is true, or can we do something about it? That CSS modules are really slow to compile.
CSS modules are slow. I don't have that impression using CSS modules in production.
This is something I, am reading across the internet.
Okay, because this is new to me. I've never heard of CSS modules being slow. I can imagine if you use some preprocessors like Sass and use a Ruby implementation of it, it might slow because, yeah, so parsing like all the stuff using Sass and then going to PostCSS, but PostCSS is very fast. So I migrated a huge code base from Sass, even from libsass to PostCSS, and it was like 10 times faster. So I would like to see an exact repository where it's slow, just to be able to say why is it slow. But
maybe second question. You said the CSS preprocessors are supported. So is extent in the Sass supported?
Yeah. So basically, how PostCSS works, you can chain it. So if you decide to use PostCSS, you don't have to quit using any preprocessor you're using right now. So you still can use as a first step, you compile CSS from Sass, and the second step, you use PostCSS parser to apply some other transformations. Yeah.
So I can have like global class, I don't know, button blue, and I can extend in some subcomponent deep in the tree using the Sass syntax. Add, extend. You probably know.
Yeah. If you still you have to use Sass for extension, but there is also this pre-CSS PostCSS plugin that basically imitates pre-processors. So you can use the same syntax you would use even with extend not all Sass semantics, but most of it, and you still can use PostCSS to compile, which is much faster in my experience.
Okay, any other question? Maybe if you, I have another question. If you use preprocessor, you told that you can chain all tasks. Do you have any experience with another packages like PostStylus, for example, with Stylus preprocessor?
I don't have any experience. I didn't use Stylus or less. I only use Sass. But I use Sass with PostCSS. Basically, everybody uses it this way if you use autoprefix, and I think most of us use autoprefixes. So this is what happens. You compile your CSS from Sass, and then you apply autoprefix plugin. But what happens in between is PostCSS parses your CSS that was compiled from Sass, and adds with new rules to it. So yeah.
So does it work with Sass syntax as well?
Yeah, it does. You can use this pre-CSS plugin for PostCSS, which sounds ridiculous, but this is, and also you have to define the syntax. There's an option for PostCSS to use different syntaxes, and you install the syntax from npm. It will be PostCSS Sass syntax, I guess, the package name, and then you can just use this syntax to say PostCSS parser to use not CSS parser but Sass parser or SCSS parser. So you can use PostCSS to compile your Sass files. Like not all the semantic will work. For example, loops will not work, I guess, and some other stuff. But extend will work. I can't remember right now. I can't remember exactly what will work, what not. But I think maps will not work. Loops will not work. So you have to do some refactoring. But in my opinion, it's worth it to switching if you have a pretty much big code base, because it will improve the speed of the compilation significantly.
Thanks.
I know it sounds evil, but can you use some global things like normalize or some themes like with this?
Yeah, sure, because like you can use Bootstrap or normalize whatever you want. The thing is, when you write your own CSS, you don't want by chance break other things, right? And by including some third-party CSS into your project, you basically introduce some loophole where you don't know what class names are defined in this project, right? So it's a third-party CSS, so you don't know what class names they use. So if they use some generic class names like button, and you also created a class name called button, in CSS they will just looking at the specificity, it will apply both rules to your custom button, right? And what you want is to be sure that you don't collide. So your class name button doesn't collide this global button. So if you still want to use this shared dot button from Bootstrap, you just apply it as a global class name, right? And then you use your local class name in your component. So it's like you apply both class names to the component.
But on the component, how do you write the class name? It says as modules you are using JavaScript objects, and with Bootstrap you are JavaScript string.
Yeah, but if we go back to the slide, you will see that then we switched when we switch from here to here. Yeah, so it's still a class name. So what we do here is we evaluate some expression, right?
But for example, if I have Bootstrap, how do I apply column small 6?
We can just concatenate to strings because this is a string, right?
Okay.
So you just write like class name, const class names will be button plus empty white space styles.button. So you interpolate with string and it will contain like both class names. One is generated in CSS module by CSS modules and the other one will be global one.
Can I use the backticks from ECMAScript 6?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is the ECMAScript 6. You will have to include bubble into the compilation step, but I suppose everybody has it now who works with React. So yeah. Yeah.
Is there some best practice for importing variables?
You mean in CSS modules?
Yeah, sure.
Just to make sure, this is not about sharing JavaScript variables.
No.
Okay.
Because usually you want to share some colors and fonts.
Yeah, so this is what this slide was about. So you can explicitly import something from some file. So you can extract the same way you would do with SAS or ECSS. You will have some variables.css with all your variables, and then you can just import. In this case, it will import class name, but there is a way to import variables as well. It has a little bit different syntax, but you have to check on CSS modules. There are examples how to use variables. The same approach. So you will be import like in the JavaScript file, you can import variables from some shared CSS file as well.
Okay, thanks.
And one question, so in one of the previous slides you showed how we can convert the regular class names like button to some encoded and short unique class names. So how are we going to troubleshoot these classes? Is it going to be any difficulties finding
in this case it will be difficult, but I suggest using this one just for a production build. But with this local ident name, you can define the template that will be used to generate this local class names. So in this case, it's just a hash, right? But in this case, we used this string to generate it. So it basically says it should be file name, the local name that comes from here. So it's button and label, and then a hash. So this one is much easier to debug because you see. You not only see the class name you use, but also a file name, so it's much easier to find what file is it. But if you collocate it like this, it's in a component inside, so it says it all. It's in button CSS, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the short hash class name is just for production.
Yeah, so what I usually do is I have a webpack base config, and then I extend from it for development and for production. And in production, I just say, use just hashes for production and use longish class names in development so I can find out what class name is it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it makes sense. Thanks.
Is there any support for source maps?
I was scared by this one. I don't have an answer. I think there is. I know where there are issues with source maps. But I think right now there are source maps. So yeah, sorry, you have to check yourself. I don't know exactly right now, so yeah. But I think the issue was solved.
Okay, anyone else?
Would you recommend rewriting like component by component or like a whole project?
I think it depends, and depends on your project. So for like very big legacy projects, it's definitely better to go from smallish components. So usually when I work on big legacy projects, and I have to implement something new, I implement new stuff using the better way, and the old stuff just remains. And when I have to touch it, I refactor it before I start working on it. And this CSS modules and PostCSS, it's easy because you still can have the old pipeline of compiling your stuff, or even just normal CSS, and then you can introduce new stuff and improve. So I think it's always it's always depends on how big is a project and how much time do you have for improving it.
And there was a slide where you imported class name from style.css.
From style.css, you probably mean the this one. Sorry, this one.
Yeah. So how is the class name exported from the style CSS?
The CSS module uses some interoperable format to exchange this information with other modules. So webpack, when webpack parses it, it will know that this is a dependency, and it will also get the whole information about this class name. So it also gets this object with maps. So yeah, so how webpack every dependency in your CSS file will be treated by webpack as a dependency in your tree. So there's nothing different. So it goes through the same pipeline, and this way it can handle basically all this resolution of files and class names in it.
But class name is some keyword, or it's just random word written?
Say this would be like another class name in your file. So you will just write another class name here. So basically this is the class name you use in style CSS. And it will compose like all rules of this class name from style CSS. It will add it to this one, but it will do it in a smart way. So when you compile and you look at your CSS, or not CSS, but the place you use it. So say in React component, you will see that there are just two class names staying along. So it will be a class name and other class name in it. So it does inheritance using CSS, not just like Sass actually Sass also has two ways to add this inheritance in it. So one way is just to copy and paste basically, and another way is just by creating longer class names, right?
Okay, anyone else? So, thank you, Andrey.
Thank you for having me. If you still have questions, I will be around. Just ask me. Thanks.
So, thank you that you came. Maybe start work. I will be happy if you share your feedback with us. We have Twitter, follow us on Twitter and become a member of our group. We will announce other next meetups. And as I mentioned, kiwi.com prepared some refreshments for us, and there will be some food. So I'm looking forward for chat with you, and let's network. And Andrey, as he mentioned, will be here too. So if you have any other questions, I'm pretty sure that he will answer. So thank you and enjoy the evening.